The rain fell in thick sheets that night, the kind that makes the old world whisper again. I stood before the mansion, its cracked windows glowing faintly from the lightning, its vast iron gates moaning like they'd waited a century for someone to come home. I ran my hand along the rusted metal, feeling the chill of history. The place was a wreck moss-covered stone, collapsed verandas, a roof half gone, but something in my chest told me it wasn't just an old house. It was a story buried under time, and I was about to bring it back to life. People in the town called it the Whispering Estate. Some said it was cursed. Others said it was haunted by the first owner who died mysteriously inside. But I wasn't scared. I'd spent years flipping properties, restoring what others had given up on. This time, though, it felt different. It wasn't just about profit, it was about redemption. When I bought the mansion, the realtor looked at me like I was insane. "You know the HOA won't like this," he said, leaning close as if the walls themselves could hear. "That estate's on private HOA land, old and strict. They'll bury you in rules before you even start work." I just smiled. Let them try. I had no idea how serious he was. The first few days were peaceful. My team arrived with trucks full of tools, wood, and fresh paint. We tore down rotten panels, installed new beams, and scrubbed a century's worth of decay. Every night, I walked through the empty halls with a lantern, feeling the air grow lighter with each repair. The mansion had a soul, and I could feel it breathing again. I documented everything for my YouTube restoration channel, from ruin to royalty, and views started climbing fast. People loved the mystery, the history, the sheer madness of restoring a house this old. But on the fourth day, something strange happened. A black SUV stopped outside the gates, and a man in a crisp suit stepped out. He looked like he'd stepped out of a courtroom. "Mr. Rahan," he said flatly. "I'm from the Lakeshore Historic HOA. You've violated 5 major codes already." I frowned. "What codes?" I just started fixing the property. He opened a file, tapping his pen. "Unauthorized reconstruction, visual obstruction, improper materials, noise disturbance, and failure to pay historic maintenance fees." I laughed. "You must be kidding. I just bought the place last week." There were no fees. His expression didn't change. They've been accruing for 98 years. My laughter died. "You're saying I owe for something that happened a century ago?" He nodded. "Ownership transfers the debt." It was absurd. But he handed me a notice, stamped and official looking, with a figure that made my blood freeze: $187,000 in back dues. "Pay within 30 days, he said. "Or the HOA will initiate removal of unapproved structures, which, in this case, means your mansion." I watched him leave, his SUV vanishing down the muddy road. For a long time, I stood there in the rain, the paper crumpling in my fist. I told myself it was a bluff, a mistake. But deep down, I knew these HOA types. They were powerful, organized, and merciless. Still, I wasn't going to give up. The mansion had already become something personal. Over the next week, I kept working. I poured everything into it: fresh plaster, polished floors, chandeliers glinting again after 100 years of dust. Each creak of the staircase sounded like gratitude. My followers online cheered me on. "Don't let them stop you," one comment said. "You're saving history." Another wrote, "That HOA sounds corrupt. Expose them." By the second week, I had restored half the house. That's when the real trouble started. Someone began cutting my power at night. My paint cans disappeared. Then one morning I found a dead crow nailed to the gate, a note under its wing: "Stop before we stop you." It shook me, but I didn't quit. I installed security cameras, motion lights, and a big sign that said, "Private property, no trespassing." My friend Hamza, a local cop, stopped by one evening. This HOA Lakeshore has a reputation," he warned. "They control half this district. The sheriff's office works with them on code enforcement. If they want you gone, they'll find a way." I leaned against the railing, looking at the fading sunset behind the mansion. Then I'll find a way to stay. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived. It was stamped again, this time with final notice. The fine had grown to $190,600. At the bottom, in red ink, failure to pay will authorize property demolition under HOA ordinance. 4.7a. My hands shook as I read it. They actually had legal grounds. I called their office, but no one answered. I emailed, texted, even visited their building. But every time, I was turned away by a guard. Finally, I decided to fight back publicly. I uploaded a new video. HOA threatens to demolish a historic mansion. Help me save it. Within hours, it went viral. Thousands commented, tagging local officials and journalists. You can't destroy history. That's corruption. Stand strong, Rihan. The pressure began to grow, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. But that hope didn't last. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of engines outside. I rushed to the window. Headlights cut through the fog. Several black vehicles were parked near my gate. A man with a flashlight was speaking into a radio. I grabbed my phone and ran downstairs. By the time I opened the door, someone was banging hard from the other side. Open up. Sheriff's Department. My heart pounded. I opened the door and there he was, a real county sheriff badge gleaming under the porch light. Mr. Rehan, you've been issued a property compliance order. You're in violation of local HOA enforcement law. You need to pay or vacate the premises. His tone was cold, almost rehearsed. Behind him, I saw 2 men from the HOA smirking. One of them was the man in the suit from before. I'm not paying a century-old debt, I said. You can't just threaten me like this. The sheriff crossed his arms. Then we'll proceed with removal. I stepped closer. You mean demolition? He didn't answer. He handed me another paper and turned to leave. The suited man smirked. You have 72 hours. The next morning, I called my lawyer. He said the HOA was exploiting an obscure clause that allowed historical preservation assessments. It was legal, but barely. I had only one option: gather proof of fraud or pay the impossible sum. I spent that whole day digging through archives, calling city offices, even interviewing locals. What I found sent chills down my spine. The original HOA charter from 1924 had been modified illegally in the 80s to include the mansion as part of their jurisdiction, even though it was never part of the lakeshore community. In other words, they'd forged history. Now, I had evidence. I could fight back. That night, as rain battered the roof again, I sat in the restored drawing room, golden light flickering over the old portraits. The house almost alive again, and made a decision. I wasn't just restoring a mansion anymore. I was restoring justice. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. To be continued. If you were in my place, would you stand your ground or walk away before it's too late? The next 72 hours were a blur of fear and fury. I barely slept. Every sound outside the window felt like a warning. The rain had turned to fog, thick and unmoving, wrapping the mansion in silence. I worked from dawn to midnight, gathering files, old maps, and scanned copies of the original property line. Every document proved what I'd already begun to suspect: the HOA had no right to this land. The Whispering Estate stood on independent property that had been excluded from the Lakeshore Zone in 1925 after a legal dispute. They'd forged a signature in the 80s to claim it back. Someone in that HOA had been stealing land for decades, and I had proof. But proof meant nothing unless someone listened. I emailed my lawyer everything. He called back a few hours later, his voice tight. Rihan, this is serious. They've got political connections. The sheriff won't side with you unless a judge orders a hold. We need to file an injunction immediately, I agreed. He said it would take 3 days. 3 days. The same time limit the HOA had given me. That night, I sat in the grand hall, the fire crackling weakly. The portraits on the walls, old owners long gone, stared down at me like silent witnesses. I whispered, I won't let them destroy you. The house creaked softly in the wind as if answering back. By morning, I drove into town to meet a journalist from the Daily Crescent, a woman named Anaya who had seen my viral video. She was young, sharp-eyed, and full of fire. Your story's everywhere, she said as we sat in the corner of a coffee shop. The HOA is threatening legal action against your channel for defamation. But people are on your side. They're calling this the mansion war." She smiled slightly. "You've stirred up something bigger than you think." Told her everything: the sheriff, the notices, the fake documents. Her expression hardened. "Send me everything. I'll start digging." When I returned to the mansion that evening, something was wrong. The main gate was open. My stomach dropped. I rushed inside, and my worst fear hit me. Suma had broken in. The furniture I'd restored was smashed, my camera equipment gone, paint splattered across the marble floor. On one wall, someone had scrawled in red, "You can't win." For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. Then rage flooded me. I grabbed my phone, checked the cameras, and found they'd all been disabled. Every single one. Except one. The old hidden camera near the porch had captured them: 3 men in masks, all wearing identical black jackets with the HOA logo on the sleeve. I called the sheriff's office immediately. When he arrived an hour later, he barely looked around. "You don't have proof they were HOA," he said dryly. "Could be vandals." I showed him the video. He didn't even take notes. "Not admissible. Low quality. Best you fix your locks." He turned to leave. That's when I realized the sheriff wasn't neutral. He was protecting them. After he left, I sat on the floor among the ruins of my hard work. For a moment, I felt completely defeated. But then a message came through and I had found something. She'd uncovered a trail of payments from the HOA's treasurer to a private construction company. The same company had been contracted to demolish abandoned homes and sell the land to developers. My mansion was next on the list. That night, I went live again. They broke in. They destroyed my work. "But I have proof now," I told the camera. My voice shook, not from fear, but from fury. "They want this land because it's valuable. They forged records to claim it. They're lying to everyone. But I'm not backing down." The video exploded online, 500,000 views in 24 hours. Comments poured in, people offering help, lawyers messaging for free consultation, even historians volunteering to back my claim. The pressure was building. The HOA couldn't hide forever. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was deep and deliberate. "Mr. Rahan, I suggest you stop talking." "Who is this?" "Someone trying to keep you safe? You're making enemies in places you don't understand." "Is this a threat?" A pause. Then softly, "No, it's a warning. The sheriff's coming again. Tonight." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, then out the window. The fog was rolling in thick again. My lawyer hadn't finished the injunction yet, and the court office was closed until morning. If they came tonight, there was nothing I could do except record everything. I set up every hidden camera I had left, one under the porch light, one inside the main hall, another in the backyard. I even placed a small one behind the old chandelier. Then I waited. Around midnight, I heard engines again. I turned off all the lights and peered through the curtains. Headlights. For vehicles this time. Men with flashlights stepping out, one of them holding what looked like a sledgehammer. My heart pounded. I started recording on my phone as backup. The first knock was thunderous. Sheriff's Department. "Open the door." I didn't move. I just shouted back, "You're trespassing." I've filed a motion. No answer, just another bang. Then the sound of boots on the veranda. The front door shuddered under the weight of something hitting it. I grabbed a crowbar from beside the fireplace, my pulse racing. Then silence. A few seconds later, the door burst open. They stepped inside. The sheriff in front, flanked by 2 men in black jackets. "Rehan, stand down," the sheriff barked. "You're interfering with lawful property removal." "This isn't lawful," I shouted. "You're acting on forged documents." He ignored me. "Men, begin inspection." One of the men started toward the staircase. I moved to block him. "You're not going anywhere?" He shoved me hard, but I held my ground. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "You already made sure I would," I snapped back. Then, something unexpected happened. Blue lights flashed outside. More sirens. The sheriff turned, confused. Through the open doorway, I saw another car pulling up a county patrol, different department. Two uniformed officers stepped out. One of them shouted, "Sheriff Daniels, step away from the property." Everything froze. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "This is my jurisdiction." "It's not anymore," the new officer said, holding a document. "Judge's emergency order? No enforcement allowed until verification of ownership." It was my lawyer. He had filed the injunction early that morning, and somehow the judge had signed it within hours. Relief washed over me so hard I nearly dropped to my knees. The sheriff glared at me, his face red with fury. "This isn't over," he said, and stormed out with his men. When their vehicles disappeared into the fog, I finally exhaled. I walked outside, standing in the cold air, watching the sun's first lights seep over the hills. The mansion stood silent behind me, wounded but still alive. I whispered, "They came to destroy you, but we're still standing." Anaya called that morning. "You just went national," she said breathlessly. "Your live feed got shared by 3 major news pages. People are demanding an investigation into Lakeshore HOA." I smiled weakly. "Good, because I'm not done." That afternoon, I sat at my desk, reviewing the footage from last night. Every word, every threat, every illegal move, they were all caught on camera. It was proof they couldn't bury. But even as I watched, I knew they wouldn't stop here. They'd lost a battle, not the war. And sure enough, that evening, another letter slid under my door. No stamp, no address. Just one line written in bold ink. "If the law protects you, we won't use the law next time." I looked out at the long driveway stretching into the mist. Somewhere out there, they were watching, waiting. But so was I, because now I had more than evidence I had allies. And soon, the whole world would see what the Lakeshore HOA really was. The paper in my hand felt heavier than it should have. Those words, "If the law protects you, we won't use the law next time," kept echoing in my head. I set it down on the desk, staring at the dark ink, as if it might move. Outside, the evening light faded into a low mist, and for the first time, I truly felt it, the weight of the danger I'd brought onto myself. This wasn't just about rules or property lines anymore. It was personal. They wanted to break me. I walked through the mansion, every creak in the wood sounding sharper than usual. The house had begun to feel alive again after months of work, but now it felt like it was holding its breath with me. I checked every lock, every window, every corner. My cameras were still recording, red lights blinking quietly like tiny sentinels. I whispered to myself, "They won't scare me out of here." But deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed it. Anaya called later that night. "Rayhan, listen carefully," she said, her voice low. I dug deeper. "The HOA president, his name's Charles Marin, has a history. He used to work for a development firm that went bankrupt after being accused of fraud. And guess who his lawyer was back then? Sheriff Daniels." My stomach twisted. "So they've been partners for years? More like co-conspirators?" she said. "Marin bought his way into the HOA after that collapse. He's been using it to seize old land, declare it abandoned, then sell it to shell companies he secretly owns." The phone went quiet for a second before she added, "Rayhan, this mansion isn't their first. It's their last big score, and you're in the way." I rubbed my forehead, pacing near the window. "We need to expose him," she said, "but you need to be careful. Don't stay alone tonight." I looked around at the half-restored drawing room, the flickering lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Too late for that. That night, the storm returned. Wind howled through the cracks, rain hammering the old windows. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming from downstairs. My pulse raced. I slipped out of bed, grabbed the crowbar again, and crept toward the staircase. The house was pitch dark, except for the faint lightning flickers outside. I stopped halfway down, listening. The sound came again, a creak, then another. Someone was inside. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the hall below, and I saw a shadow move near the door. I lunged forward, switching on the light. No one. The door was locked. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Muddy footprints. Fresh, they led from the back door toward the main hall and vanished halfway across the floor. I checked the cameras. All working this time. I rewound the footage, and there it was. At 2:08 a.m., the back door swung open by itself. A tall figure stepped in, face covered, carrying something metallic. Then the video glitched for 2 seconds, and when it returned, the figure was gone. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't random. They were testing me, watching how far I'd go before breaking. The next morning, I took the footage to the police again. This time, I went to a different precinct, one outside Lakeshore's jurisdiction. The officer who met me, Sergeant Malik, studied the video carefully. "You're not imagining things," he said. "Whoever's behind this knows how to avoid detection. The glitch means they used a signal jammer. Professional stuff. Promised to forward it to the state investigators." For the first time, someone actually believed me. When I returned home, a car was parked across the street. A black sedan, tinted windows. I could see the outline of someone inside, just sitting there, watching. I recorded it from my phone, then went inside, pretending not to notice. My nerves were on fire. By evening, Anaya sent me another message. "Check your email." She'd sent scanned copies of financial documents leaked from a whistleblower who'd once worked under Marin. The numbers told a terrifying story. Over 12 properties reclaimed and sold for millions. Each one followed the same pattern. False fines, sheriff involvement, forced eviction, then quiet demolition. The profits were funneled through offshore accounts. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. I had enough evidence to destroy them publicly. But I also knew what that meant. They'd come harder now. That night, I packed a bag just in case. Camera hard drives, laptop documents, all locked in a metal box. I hid it behind a loose panel in the wall near the fireplace. If anything happened, at least the proof would survive. Then, I sat by the window, watching the fog roll through the garden. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number again. "Last warning. Leave tonight." I typed back before I could stop myself. "Come make me." Minutes later, I heard an engine start outside. I rushed to the window. The same black sedan sped off down the road. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I met Anaya in person again, this time at the local courthouse. We'd managed to schedule a hearing with the city's historical committee to review the mansion's ownership claim. If they confirmed my evidence, the HOA would lose legal standing permanently. She smiled when she saw me. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "Just stay alert." The hearing was set for Friday. That gave me 2 days. 2 days to make sure the mansion and everything inside was safe. But danger doesn't always wait for schedules. On Thursday night, as I was reviewing files, the lights flickered and went out completely. The generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. Then I heard it again. The sound of boots. This time outside, on the gravel. My camera showed 4 men approaching from the road, flashlights cutting through the mist. I grabbed my phone and called the police. "They're here again," I whispered. "Send someone fast." "Sir, please provide your address," the operator said calmly. I did. Then she paused. "That area is restricted under HOA enforcement. We can't dispatch without county approval." I yelled, "They're breaking in." "Sir, I'm sorry, but the line went dead." Glass shattered somewhere behind me. I ran to the back hall. A window was broken, and a shadow climbed through. I swung the crowbar, missing by inches as the man ducked. Another came through the door. I bolted upstairs, heart hammering. My mind screamed, "Get to the safe room." I reached the attic and locked the trapdoor behind me. The rain had started again, pounding on the roof like war drums. I could hear them downstairs, moving room to room, calling out, "You should have left, Rihan." I fumbled for my phone, opening the live stream. My screen lit up, showing my terrified face in the dark. "They're here," I whispered. "The HOA sent people to destroy my house, please. Someone record this." Comments started flooding in instantly. Thousands of viewers, all watching live as the chaos unfolded. Down below, a crash echoed through the halls. Smoke started rising, thick, black, choking. My chest seized. They'd set fire to something. I coughed, covering my mouth, dragging myself toward the attic window. I smashed it open and climbed onto the roof, rain soaking me instantly. Sirens. Finally, real ones this time. I could see red and blue lights cutting through the fog at the end of the road. The men below shouted, scattering into the dark. I shouted for help, waving. Within minutes, firefighters arrived, dousing the flames that had caught near the back wall. The mansion survived, but barely. One officer climbed up to me, helping me down. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "Another 5 minutes, and this place would have gone up." I looked back at the scorched wall, the smoke curling into the night sky. "They won't stop," I whispered. And I was right. Because the next morning, the HOA publicly denied everything. On live television, their president claimed I'd staged the fire myself for attention. He called me a fraud, a liar. And just like that, the public started to split. Some believed me. Others called it a stunt, but I didn't care. I had truth on my side. And now, after what they'd done, I wasn't just defending my home anymore. I was going to destroy their empire. The courtroom smelled of old paper and polished wood. A place where promises were supposed to be kept and lies were supposed to be exposed. I sat in the back, fingers knotting and unknotting the strap of my bag, while Anaya paced the hallway outside, talking into her phone. The hearing for the historical committee was packed neighbors, a few local activists, and cameras from the regional news. The air felt electric, as if something huge was about to break open. When the committee convened, the chairman peered at my documents with a brow furrowed so deep, I thought it might crack his forehead. The maps I'd dug up, hand-drawn parcels, signatures, stamped seals from 90 years ago were placed on the long oak table like relics. Anaya had done more than report. She'd found 2 retired clerks who remembered the 1925 settlement and vouched for the original exclusion of the mansion from Lakeshore's boundaries. Their memories matched my papers like pieces of a broken mirror finally fitting together. Marin's lawyer, a polished man with slicked hair and teeth that flashed like knives, argued elegantly that the signatures could be forgeries and that the committee should demand forensic proofs. He implied I was making claims on emotional grounds, not legal ones. Meanwhile, one of Marin's allies, someone I'd thought was a friendly neighbor, sat at the back, smiling too widely. My stomach tightened when our eyes met, and he nodded, subtle as a blade. By the time the committee adjourned, they'd provisionally ruled in my favor in order to stay any demolition and a directive for a formal title verification. The room erupted into relieved murmurs. I felt buoyant for the first time in weeks, like the mansion breathed alongside me. But as we stepped into the hallway, Anaya's message lit up my phone. "Meet me outside now."
"Outside?"
She looked pale. "They're mobilizing," she said without preamble. "Local politicians are calling. Marin's pulling strings, and I interviewed one of his contractors. He told me something weird, said he'd been paid extra for cleanup jobs and hinted he had a list of properties marked non-compliant. He said they were told to coerce owners, not negotiate." She paused, eyes searching mine. "Also, someone went through the footage you handed to the police. The sheriff's men are furious. They claim the footage is edited. They want to call it into question." My anger flared then, hot and sharp. Edit it all they want. These are real people, real footage, real fire, real threats. But Anaya's next line was the one that landed like a stone. "There's more. I think someone leaked your address to them last night. They knew when you were traveling. Someone close to you gave them a schedule." A cold numbness spread through my limbs. My mind raced through faces, contractors, helpers, even Hamza, the cop who'd once warned me. Betrayal stung more than the threats. It meant the enemy wasn't just outside the gate, but had crept inside the circle I thought I could trust. That evening, I returned to the mansion with fewer people around. The house looked bruised charred wood at one corner, soot darkening the eaves. Volunteers and neighbors had come by during the day to help clean and board up the worst damage. I walked through rooms I'd spent months restoring. Each was a reminder of how quickly violence could erase work and memory. I kept telling myself the committee's order would hold, that law could still be a shield. But the leak made me doubt everything. Late that night, a text arrived from an unknown number. "We know who you trust. He talks too much." Attached was a photo of my friend Fahad, smiling on my porch the day he'd helped move a chandelier. My chest went cold. Fahad had been with me since day one, always cracking jokes, pouring tea, staying late to help. I couldn't imagine him betraying me. But the evidence was there. I called Fahad immediately. He picked up with a heavy, guilty-sounding breath. "Rahan, he began, voice thin. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. They pressured me. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd take my brother's shop off the map. They threatened the family." His words were a punch. "I gave Small Things a list of dates you'd left where you stored documents. I thought I could control it, give them crumbs. It's my fault." Anger warred with pity. "You could have come to me," I said, hearing the accusation in my voice. "We could have found another way." It sounded hollow. "I know. I'm sorry, Yar." I thought they were bluffing. "I didn't think they'd burn the place." There was silence, then a crackle. "They told me to watch. They told me to look like nothing was wrong. I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to scream, to slap him, to hug him until we both burst into tears. Instead, I felt the cold calculus of what needed doing." "You'll help me now," I said. "You'll tell me everything, names, contacts, times. If you're with them, you help undo it." Had agreed, voice ragged. He came the next morning and sat at my kitchen table, spilling what he knew. Meetings in a private club, coded messages about cleanup, contractors with no invoices paid in cash, and Marin's promises of bigger projects that would fix small problems. He described threats to his family so plainly that I saw the stubborn guilt etched into his face. We set a condition. He would testify if needed. And I would work to protect his family legally and publicly so the threats wouldn't return like ghosts. With Fahad's testimony and Anaya's continued coverage, the momentum shifted. The papers ran exposes, and social media churned with outrage. Local politicians started to distance themselves from Marin. One or two even called for a thorough investigation. The sheriff's office, which had been so quick to act for Marin, found itself under scrutiny as audits were demanded for past demolitions and code enforcement actions. The very men who'd once used the law like a hammer suddenly found themselves on the defensive. But it wasn't only a courtroom battle. It became personal in ways I hadn't expected. My mother, who lived in a small flat across town, called almost daily, her voice trembling. "Beta, please think of your safety," she urged. "This is dangerous. Leave, sell it, move." "Our?" cut me deeper than any threat. I would have liked to say I could protect her from everything, but the truth was clear. We were all vulnerable. A small victory arrived in the form of a forensic analyst who confirmed the 1925 exclusion signatures matched other documents from that era. Any alleged forgeries were highly improbable. The committee sent a formal letter to the sheriff's office demanding they cease enforcement while the matter was under review. Marin's veneer of control began to chip. Yet Marin would not give up. As his power dwindled publicly, he grew crueler in private. Anonymous threats continued. Exxon volunteers. Slurs spread to discredit Anaya, and a smear campaign alleging I'd staged the fire to garner sympathy. One night, a brick flew through the window of the community center where volunteers were meeting. A note taped to it. "You cannot win against us. Get." It was a message that trembled with the arrogance of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Determined to stay ahead, I organized a public restoration day and open invitation for anyone to come help rebuild a single room. We turned it into an event. Music, free food by volunteers, live cameras broadcasting the hands at work. 100 people showed up, neighbors, history students, old caretakers who remembered the mansion as a child. We painted, hammered, and laughed, and for a few hours the past and present felt united towards something hopeful. Then word came that a federal investigator had requested copies of the HOA's transaction records. The request was quiet but felt seismic. It meant the game had moved to a level Marin couldn't simply intimidate away. It meant evidence might become law. I felt elated and terrified at once. Justice was beginning to look possible. Despite the progress, the mansion still bore fresh wounds. There were nights I woke up dripping sweat, convinced I could still smell smoke. I wandered through the rooms, laying my palm on cool plaster, whispering apologies and promises alike. I thought of the people who had helped for Anaya volunteers, strangers who had sent messages of support. Their faces kept me steady. And then, on a rainy morning, I received a call that brought everything into focus. A voice official, distant, telling me that a sealed indictment had been prepared against several individuals tied to forced demolitions and property fraud. Marin's name was on the list. Sheriff Daniel's role was under review. The words felt unreal, like the plot of a film finally catching up with reality. Still, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. The legal machinery moves slow. Marin could fight by more days and strike in ways that didn't appear on any docket. What I did instead was walk through the garden and stand by the gate, feeling the cold rain on my face. The mansion loomed behind me, worn, steady, stubborn. I whispered into the wind, "We're not done." Inside, a volunteer was hammering in a new board, and I watched each strike echo through the core of the house like a heartbeat. The fight had widened from one man and one home to a community trying to right a long string of wrongs. It was messy and dangerous, and it would take more than a courtroom to finish it. I had learned something hard. Power corrodes quietly and deeply, and exposing it sometimes makes things more dangerous before they become safer. Trust had to be rebuilt, and every ally felt like a victory and a risk. But with Fahad's confession, Anaya's tenacity, volunteer hands, and the slow grind of legal pressure, we were no longer isolated. Marin's empire still cast a long shadow, but that shadow was finally being measured. At night I would sit by the window, looking over the next few weeks were a blur of tension and cautious triumphs. Every day brought a new headline, a new twist, a new name exposed from the web Marin had spun for decades. The mansion had become more than a house, it was a symbol, a silent witness to corruption and courage alike. But for every victory, a new shadow crept closer. The morning after the indictments were filed, I woke to the sound of heavy footsteps outside. When I stepped onto the porch, 2 unmarked SUVs were parked at the curb. Men in plain clothes stood near the gate, pretending to check their phones. My gut twisted. They weren't cops, at least not the kind that worked for justice. These were watchers sent to remind me that paper victories didn't mean safety. I pulled my phone out and recorded them until they drove away, leaving tire marks like scars on the wet street. Inside, Anaya sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of documents. "They'll try to flip it," she said, without looking up. "Marin's lawyers are arguing selective enforcement, claiming you harassed them with illegal recordings. It's desperate, but it buys them time." She rubbed her temples. "We need something undeniable proof that Marin and the sheriff coordinated directly." I opened my laptop and clicked through the camera archives I had saved, this time looking for background details, not just faces. After hours of watching, I spotted Ayaton the night before the fire, when 2 trucks idled by the fence. A reflection in one windshield caught something across the road, a county patrol cruiser, lights off. The timestamp placed it exactly 20 minutes before the blaze started. Anaya's eyes widened. "If that's verified, it's game over for them," she said. "We can prove law enforcement was complicit." We sent the footage to a contact in the state attorney's office. Within days, subpoenas were issued. The sheriff's department went silent. Rumors spread that Daniels had taken medical leave, but everyone knew what that meant. Marin, however, still hadn't surfaced publicly. His silence was eerie to calm, too deliberate. Fahad helped quietly from the background, sending me updates about meetings he overheard, about whispers that Marin had fled town to a safe property 2 states away. But even from afar, Marin's influence reached back like a claw. Contractors began quitting the mansion's restoration, citing safety concerns. Anonymous calls told me to stop playing hero. And then one night the power went out. I was in the study, reviewing files, when the lights flickered, then died completely. The generator didn't kick in, someone had cut it. My heart started pounding as I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the hallway. The mansion, so beautiful in daylight, felt haunted in the dark. Every creak sounded like a threat. I thought I heard footsteps outside the kitchen door. I whispered Fahad, but only wind answered. Then a thud. The back window shattered, glass raining over the floor. I aimed my flashlight toward the noise. A figure in black climbed through, boots crunching on the shards. For a second, our eyes met in the beam's glare. I recognized the face, one of Marin's contractors, the same man who had delivered the fake demolition notice weeks ago. I didn't think I grabbed the nearest thing, a crowbar leaning by the wall, and swung. He ducked, lunged forward, and knocked the flashlight away. The room plunged into darkness. We struggled, grunts, breath, chaos, and then headlights from outside swept through the window, blinding us both. Someone shouted, "Stop! Drop it!" It was Hamza, the same deputy who'd once warned me quietly to watch my back. He'd come off duty early, responding to my distress ping from the security app. The intruder bolted through the back door, disappearing into the woods before Hamza could grab him. "You okay?" Hamza panted. I nodded, shaking, adrenaline flooding every nerve. He looked around at the broken glass, then back at me. "This isn't over," he said grimly. "You've kicked a hornet's nest, but they're panicking now. That's a good sign." Over the next few days, Hamza fed us information discreetly how internal investigators had seized Daniel's files, how Marin's finances were under forensic review. Every piece of news felt like a brick placed back into the mansion's foundation. Still, the constant tension gnawed at me. I started sleeping in bursts, keeping a bat by the bed. Anaya's next exposed dropped like a bomb. She had traced a money trail connecting Marin's HOA fund to shell companies, used for property improvement contracts across multiple states. The amounts matched the payments for forced demolitions, disguised as compliance projects. Within hours, the story went viral. Hashtags trended. Protesters gathered outside the HOA office with signs reading "Historic Homes, not victims." For the first time, people weren't just sympathizing, they were fighting back. Homeowners from other communities came forward, sharing stories of threats and coercion. What started as one house's survival became a statewide movement. Still, Marin's retaliation came swiftly. He filed a civil suit claiming defamation, slandering my name and Anaya's career. He called me a disgruntled amateur historian who manufactured lies for fame. This time no one bought it. The public had seen too much. The day of the next court hearing, the atmosphere felt charged. Cameras flashed as I walked up the courthouse steps. I didn't wear a suit, just a plain white shirt and the same wristwatch I'd worn during the mansion's first restoration day. Inside, Marin finally appeared, thinner, angrier, his once slick hair disheveled. He glared at me like I'd stolen something sacred. Our lawyers traded arguments for hours. But the turning point came when the state attorney entered the room carrying a sealed folder. "Your Honor," he said, "new evidence has surfaced from the Sheriff's Department's internal audit." He placed the folder on the bench. It directly links the defendant's accounts to unlawful property seizures under the guise of HOA enforcement. Marin's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. The folder was opened. Inside were copies of emails, bank transfers, and internal memos signed by Marin himself. The courtroom erupted. Anaya's pen froze mid-scribble. My chest tightened. I could barely breathe. Marin's face went pale. He whispered something to his lawyer, then slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "This is a witch hunt." The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Everyone in that room knew the tide had turned. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Anaya stood beside me, microphone in hand. "Rahan," she asked on camera, "what's next for you in the mansion?" I looked back toward the skyline where the old house waited, windows still boarded but proud. "We finish what we started," I said. "We rebuild. Not just the walls, but the truth that was buried under them." That night when I returned home, a letter was pinned to the gate. It wasn't a threat this time. It was from the state's Preservation Council. They were officially granting the mansion protected heritage status. Tears blurred my vision. The fight hadn't just saved a building, it had rewritten a piece of history. As I stepped inside, the air felt different, lighter, maybe even peaceful. For the first time in months, I turned off the security monitors and stood in silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere deep inside the walls, the house seemed to sigh, as if relieved. But even as calm settled in, I couldn't shake one thought. Marin wasn't finished. People like him never disappeared quietly. They regrouped, waited, struck again. And so, as I looked up at the chandelier glinting faintly in the dim light, I whispered to myself, "Be ready, Rihan. The last storm hasn't passed yet." That was when the phone rang on. Hamza's trembling voice on the other end said, "You need to come to the station right now. We found something in Marin's files. Something about the mansion's original owner, and it changes everything." When I reached the station, the air was thick with tension. Hamza met me at the door, his expression grim, holding a brown file folder like it was a live grenade. "You need to see this yourself," he said, leading me past rows of desks to a small back office. The blinds were half drawn, and a single overhead bulb buzzed faintly. He placed the file on the desk and stepped back. Inside were brittle, yellowed papers, deeds, tax records, letters written in cursive script that curled elegantly across the page. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than historical paperwork. But Hamza pointed to one document near the middle, an official ledger-stamped county transfer. 1931. The name of the buyer caught my eye and froze me in place. Owner L. Marin Holdings, Incorporated. Took a moment for the weight of it to sink in. Wait, the same family? I asked. Hamza nodded. The same bloodline? Your mansion, the one you bought and restored, was once owned by Marin's great-grandfather. It was part of his original estate holdings. The records show it was seized during a corruption probe back in the 1930s. The family lost everything except a few parcels of land that later became the foundation of this HOA. My mind raced. So that's why he wanted it gone. It wasn't just control, it was revenge. He wanted to erase the one piece of history his family couldn't reclaim. Exactly, Hamza said. He's been obsessed with your mansion for years. This wasn't random. Every time someone tried to buy or restore it, the HOA would find a way to drive them off code violations, property disputes, you name it. You're just the first person who didn't back down. Sank into the chair, heart hammering. Everything fit now: the anger in Marin's eyes, the relentless harassment, the need to see it destroyed rather than sold. He hadn't just wanted power. He wanted to bury a humiliation his family had carried for nearly a century. Hamza handed me another paper. There's more. This letter was written by Marin's grandfather from prison. Read the last line. It was dated 1934. The handwriting was shaky but legible. If the house still stands when my name is forgotten, may my sons take it back, or burn it so no one else does. The words sent a chill through me. History wasn't repeating itself. It was finishing unfinished business. That night, back at the mansion, I sat alone in the study, the letter lying open on the desk. The rain outside blurred the window panes like tears on glass. I stared at the fireplace, the same hearth that had survived every fire, every storm. The thought that Marin's family had once stood in this very room twisted my stomach. Their ghosts weren't metaphorical. They were embedded in the bricks. A creak echoed in the hallway. I turned, half expecting another intruder, but it was Fahad, carrying 2 cups of chai. "You look like you've seen one," he said quietly. I managed a weak smile. Maybe I have. Turns out Marin's not just a tyrant, he's a legacy of one. Fahad set the cups down and sat across from me. Then maybe it's fate that you're the one fixing what his family broke. We sat in silence, the only sound the rain and the faint hum of wind through the old vents. The house felt alive again, not just as a building, but as a keeper of stories, painful, complicated, human stories. In the following days, Naya published a final feature tying everything together: the historical ownership, the family's downfall, the decades-long vendetta. It was explosive. News outlets across the country picked it up. The narrative shifted completely. What had begun as a local HOA dispute had now become a national scandal about generational greed and abuse of power. Marin's arrest came quietly one morning, almost anticlimactic after months of chaos. He was found at a lakeside cabin, disheveled and muttering that they can't destroy what's already mine. When the police brought him in, cameras captured him glaring straight at me, his lips forming the words, "It's not over." But it was. For the first time, I felt a weight lifting. The mansion was safe. The Preservation Council confirmed full protection under state law, and volunteers returned to finish the restoration. Every day we uncovered another forgotten detail, carved date under the staircase, initials in the window glass, even an old journal hidden behind a wall panel. The journal belonged to the original builder's wife. Her entries were filled with hope and fear, and one line stood out: "Homes are not built from wood, but from faith." That line became our motto. We painted it onto a sign that hung at the front gate during the reopening ceremony. The day of the ceremony, sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows. Crowds gathered, cameras flashed, and children ran across the restored gardens. Anaya stood beside me with her microphone, but this time she didn't ask for a statement. She just smiled, knowing the story had already spoken for itself. As I cut the ribbon, cheers erupted. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a battleground, it felt like a victory monument. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through each room, touching the walls that had once trembled with fear. In the study, I placed the old prison letter and the wife's journal side by side under a glass case. They belonged together, the curse and the redemption. I stood by the window as the last light of dusk painted the lawn gold. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, not threatening, just reminding. The storm had passed, but the echoes would remain. Then, as I turned to leave, I noticed a small package by the door. No return address. Inside was a single brass key, old and ornate, tied with a note that read, "Every lock has two sides. LM." I froze, my breath catching. It was Marin's handwriting. He was behind bars. But somehow the game wasn't over. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere deep in the walls, a faint sound like a door unlocking echoed through the house. I stood very still, listening, and for the first time I realized, some stories don't end when justice is served. Some linger waiting for the next chapter to begin. The night the key arrived, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. Every gust of wind against the window made the chandeliers tremble faintly, like the house was whispering secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I sat in the study, the brass key glinting on the desk under the soft yellow lamplight. The note, "Every lock has two sides," taunted me. Part of me wanted to throw it into the fire and end it there. But another part, the same stubborn instinct that had driven me through every threat, every lie, every court battle, couldn't let it go. If Marin had sent it, it meant something. A message, a clue, or maybe one final trap. I turned the key over in my hand, tracing the grooves with my thumb. It was old, hand-forged, with a distinct emblem on the handle, a crest, shaped like an M surrounded by ivy. I'd seen it before. Somewhere I went to the cellar. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and age. My flashlight beam skimmed over the stone walls until it landed on the old wine rack built into the far corner. Behind it, faintly etched into the stone, was that same emblem. My pulse quickened. I pushed the rack aside, heart hammering as it scraped across the floor. Behind it was a small iron door, about waist height, with a rusted lock that matched the key perfectly. For a long moment, I just stared. This house had tested me more times than I could count, and now, even after Marin's downfall, it still held secrets. I inserted the key, turned it slowly. The mechanism clicked, groaned, and then the door creaked open, exhaling a breath of stale air. Inside was a narrow passageway descending into darkness, old bricks dripping with moisture. I hesitated only a second before grabbing a lantern and stepping inside. The passage twisted downward, ending in a small chamber no bigger than a bedroom. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old ledgers, boxes, and what looked like architectural blueprints. In the center of the room sat a single metal chest, sealed with a corroded latch. I knelt, pried it open, and inside found stacks of documents so old they flaked at the edges when touched. Among them, something more recent, a manila folder stamped confidential. Lakeshore Development. PLAN 2018. I flipped it open. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just Marin. It was bigger. The folder detailed plans to acquire and demolish over 20 historic properties across multiple counties, all under the guise of urban renewal. There were signatures, politicians, developers, investors, names I recognized from news broadcasts and campaign posters. Marin hadn't been acting alone. He was just one gear in a massive, well-oiled machine, and I'd only dismantled the smallest part of it. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note dated 2 months before Marin's arrest. The same looping handwriting as the one on the key. If I fall, the house will speak. It always does. The sound of rain started again above, faint at first, then harder, drumming through the ceiling. I gathered the files, sealed the chest again, and carried them upstairs. My mind was spinning. If I went public with this, it wouldn't just be another story. It would expose an entire network of corruption. But it would also make me the target again. When I emerged from the cellar, Anaya was standing at the door, soaked from the rain. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, stepping inside. "In a way," I replied, showing her the folder. She flipped through the pages, her face hardening. "This is huge, Rehan. If this is real, it goes beyond Marin. These are people with real power." "I know," I said quietly. "And they'll come for us when this hits the light." "Right." She nodded. "Then we do it carefully, one piece at a time." We used the mansion again. This place started the story. It can end it too. Over the next week, we turned the mansion into a war room. Volunteers returned, helping scan the documents and catalog every page. We worked day and night, cross-checking signatures, finding corroborations. Anaya prepared a multi-part expose, and we sent copies of the files to multiple news outlets, ensuring that no one could bury them if something happened to us. As the first part went live, the reaction was explosive. Headlines screamed about the hidden network behind HOA takeovers. Protests erupted outside City Hall. Lawsuits were filed. A federal task force was announced. It felt like the world was finally catching up to the rot we'd uncovered, but with every wave of truth came new danger. Strange cars appeared near the mansion again, watching. My emails filled with veiled threats. Anaya's editor received calls warning him to drop the story. Yet for every threat, there were a dozen messages of support. People thanking us for giving them courage to fight their own battles against corruption. On the morning the final article was published, I stood in the front garden. Sunlight glinting off the mansion's restored windows. The air felt clear for the first time in months. Hamza arrived, smiling for once. "You did it," he said. "We did," I replied. He nodded toward the house. "You know, this place used to scare me. Now it feels alive again." I looked up at it, the same mansion that had survived fire, fear, betrayal, and decades of silence. Its walls no longer felt haunted. They felt awake. That night, as the last of the volunteers left, I walked through the halls one final time. The key still sat on the desk, gleaming faintly. I turned it in my palm again, realizing Miran's final message had been right. In one sense, every lock does have two sides, one that hides and one that reveals. And for all its darkness, this house had chosen to reveal the truth. As I closed the front doors and turned off the lights, I whispered into the quiet, "Rest now. You've told your story." Outside, lightning flickered once in the distance, illuminating the iron gates and the garden beyond. The storm was finally moving away. But as the thunder rolled across the horizon, I couldn't help but smile, because even though the mansion's war was over, its legacy would outlive all of us. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I would do next. I'd dedicate the mansion as a museum, not just to architecture, but to truth, to every voice that had been silenced by greed and fear. Because sometimes history doesn't need to be rewritten. It just needs to be heard. Ending hook and call to action. And so, if you ever find yourself standing before an old house, walls cracked and stories buried, listen closely, because some walls don't just echo the past. They beg for justice. Don't look away. Be the one who listens. Be the one who rebuilds.